Então, como que nós podemos sair dessa situação atual mais fortes, mais leans?
So how can we get out of this situation more lean, stronger, ready to grow again? This is the question. I believe that everyone is involved in cost reduction projects, revising structures, focusing on short-term results in each one of the companies that you belong to. The question is this focus being done in a sort of a proper way, or are we concentrating on our base? And as we saw, we're talking about complex networks. We have several players within our supply chains, tier 2, tier 1, and this integration is very complex. So the question is, are we really working and revising our concepts? Because just revising concepts within our network, that's the only way that we'll be able to improve our efficiency. In our panel, we now have the presence of 2 OEMs and 2 logistic operators. I think this discussion will be a rich discussion. We have some practical examples that are very interesting. We're going to start with Fred Roldan, who's a GM supply chain. We're going to talk about risk management.
Em que status está esse projeto?
How this project is doing.
Escolhidos até hoje. E aonde que estão essas oportunidades?
What are the results and where the opportunities are? And we're going to see that often the results are simple things. After that, we're going to go into a discussion with Fabio Castello from Scania, Latin America. And we're going to understand the Milk Run project better. So how can we extract efficiency in supplying the manufacturing plant in São Bernardo do Campo, working on the flow, revision, planning, and the day-to-day management, working in a way that can bring more stability to the supply chain. After that, we're going to change to Paulo Sarti from Penske Logistics in Brazil. And we're going to take a look with the vision of a logistics operator, seeing how he is seeing these possibilities and the potential that exists. And then we're also going to talk about milk run. So it's going to be very interesting to understand the two sides of the coin, to see how we can improve the processes, and always that thing, we have to be flexible, we have to be trustworthy, reliable, and we have to reduce the cost in an efficient way. So then we also have to share information, because often there's information that we don't share to optimize our chain. And then last but not least, with Alex Feijolo, who's the Sales and Marketing Director of GEFCO, we are also going to approach these issues. We're going to see a very interesting case, which is a redesign of a chain, of a logistics chain to for exports, tax-wise, re-engineering, and then we're going to talk about the increase of cost, lack of scale, and all the potential that we have in the chain to be able to attend in the best manner possible. So let's start with Fred Roldan. I invite him to the floor. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Stephan. I am going to talk a little bit, as Stephan mentioned, how do we see risk when we manage the GM supply chain. But more interesting, or more important, I'm going to bring an idea which is connected to what I presented last year, which is how we believe we can live through crisis, difficulties, struggles. And I want to talk to you, what can we do when the market is not good? To talk about this, the question to everyone, what are we trying to do together? Everyone here participates one way or another of a supply chain, of a automotive supply chain. What are we trying to do? What's our goal? We have individual goals, but we have a common goal. We want to have a satisfied client. We want to have a happy client. At the end of the day, we have to think about our chain, and we have to visualize that there's someone purchasing a car, and the person will be satisfied with the service, with the after sales, with everything. So that's the first vision that we have to focus on when we think about what we can do together. Now, how complex is it to make a customer happy? Everyone says, oh, it's easy. Make the car and deliver it. That's not how it works. We have a series of things that we have to take care of. We have a chain. This automotive chain can be very complex. Here is a sort of a little map that shows several players. So we have a supplier somewhere in the world who's going to deliver to a logistics provider, who's going to transport to a port, then going to transport this to a Brazilian port, then there's going to be another supplier. There's all the part of the customs, transport, storage, logistics, and then you arrive at the plant, and this is one other supplier. So all this is extremely complex, and there's also the material part. So more, or even as important, is the flow of information. Part of the risk has to do with how good this information is and how precisely and quickly it flows in the chain. So risk analysis is part of the whole chain. Problem is, I don't have just one supplier. I have several suppliers. Each supplier of ours is a huge network of suppliers that interlink and bring even more complexity into the picture. So this is when we talk about a local supplier or an imported supplier. If I think that I have several, look how it looks. I almost have a chaotic. It's a very complex network of players that have to get together to reach a final goal, which is that client who's going to be satisfied or not with the product and the service he's going to receive. So this complexity for us is essential when we think about risk. How do we translate this into numbers? Here in Latin America, especially in the Mercosur, some numbers. We have almost 6,000 suppliers, 23,000 part numbers. I produce cars. I have a group of 600 employees. I have to produce cars, and over 1,200 trucks arrive at the plant per day, and 139 containers. So every day we have this flow happening, and therefore several players participate in all this process. And how am I going to have a happy client at the end of all this process? When I think about risk, everyone says, well, I have a problem in the port, I have a maritime problem. We think of infrastructure. We complain about infrastructure. It is a fact. We have N problems of infrastructure. But if I go after the definition of risk, it has to do with all sorts of other variables. Infrastructure is just one element. It's very complex. What I have here on the screen is a definition of risk that talks about all sorts of things that can go wrong and that can damage me financially. When I translate this to our world, we understand we have multiple dimensions of risk on the chain. So I have, for example, natural disasters, risks associated to infrastructure, macroeconomical situations, especially the situation that Brazil's going through now, economically affecting all the players that I mentioned. We can't forget that there's several different players, and each one has a different financial situation, and each one can represent a risk in a chain or in a network. I have problems commercially. I have to manage the contracts well. If I do everything the same way, I'm going to run into another risk, and I'll disconsider some factors that can interrupt my chain, and I won't reach my final client. Dollars going up. I might have wrong planning. Today, one risk that we've been seeing is my information correct? Do I know where waste is occurring? And finally, we can think of all sorts of other variables. We have a series of risks. So when we talk about management, risk management, we have to think more sophisticated, not only think of infrastructure and logistics, but we have to think about everything, including information. Is the information I have good or bad? Is it precise or not? So what does this give to us? Our vision is that everything will only work if I have an integrated chain. So I use this little box drawing. If one of the box falls, the result is for everyone. If there's going to be a damaged product, a missing product, a client at the end who's not going to receive what he wants. So we have to think. I have the final goal. So I have to communicate the best way possible to mitigate the risks that I have, and work proactively and to see the results of these risks. So the further I'm able to go, the better it is. So I have to take over my chain, and I have to control it. Find the change before the change is generated. So with a risk analysis. For example, last year I showed a tool called Materials Management Operations Guideline and Logistics Evaluation. This was a form that was developed a few years ago by some auto part makers and manufacturers, and they reached the conclusion of how we can evaluate the chain. It's a self-survey, self-guide of which elements are important, and I have to control the risks of this chain and not do something more reactive. These activities, whether it be Europe or US, it's not a detailed guideline. It's a guideline of general points that we analyze in the supply chain to try to detect if I am in the excellence model with those 197 points. Here we have the chapters and the sub-chapters. This is a summary. It analyzes, it has 6 different chapters, it has different topics in supply chain management, 30 sub-chapters, 62 requirements, and 197 criteria, without going into details, and that's not the idea behind my speech today. But the thing is that what's there is very important. Sometimes about materials, sometimes about the relationship that I have with other players in the chain, sometimes about the quality and the regularity of the information I receive and the information I distribute, how I communicate with my suppliers and with my clients. But these are all important factors to analyze. As I said last year, we started work last year, and we consolidated the analysis of these 197 points of all our first layer supplies. It's exhaustive. It doesn't seem so, but analyzing all these factors is not easy. And we started then finding opportunity points. So when we think about something that we can do to minimize risk, it's detecting beforehand where I have weaknesses in my supply chain, that complex chain that I showed you right in front, and detect what is going wrong and what I can do collaboratively to improve. Take action, work with my supplier, and then finally I'll start seeing how my supplier relates with his first tier, second tier, third, fourth tier, and improve that before a negative impact to me. So I can sort of say, well, this is not cool. What can we do to change? Is this an information issue? Is this a structural issue? Is this a resource, a knowledge issue? We can work on all of this. This is only the beginning of what we have to do. But there's all sorts of other work that has to be done on the statistics, and then we can deepen this and improve. This is still ongoing work. I would say that we consolidated and capture the information, but the information is only worthwhile if we transform it in intelligence and then in action. So we want to act on top of this information later. Another example that I can bring you, another thing that we've been doing. I have risk, and this does happen, of waste in that complex chain. So what have we done? When we have available resources and we're able to go out in the field, I always say actions happen, not on the monitor of the screen in your office, but in the field, visiting suppliers, visiting logistics people, visiting part producers, seeing how the interactions happen, whether it be information or physical information. Go out into the field. We visited 96 suppliers in 45 days. We still do that. And we involve N areas of expertise: quality guys, supply chain, logistics itself, packaging, purchasing. We put all our efforts together with our suppliers, whether it be service or parts, to detect opportunities. And in these 96, we found over 130 ideas, types of ideas. You can see examples here. Nothing too complicated. There's nothing that requires to contract a NASA scientists or any amazing mathematics. It's just simple observations that you can change. For example, change the packaging. That will help me increase the density.
Eventually, change the packaging to put parts in the same package and improve the freight. I can use a smaller pallet that takes up less space in the truck. Some of these ideas that I find wonderful, they don't come from somebody inside the meeting room or someone in a room carrying out an analysis. It comes from people who actually put the loads on the trucks. And the waste, it's a general impact that we carry out until the client. And if I eliminate that from the chain, it's beneficial for all of us. We also have some advantages analyzing how we can improve the tax spot and optimize the model that we use to pay taxes, everything legally done, but as in collaborative way, in such a way as everybody wins, and the end user and client will gain as well. And this is very much in line with this chart that I like to use, which are the cultural priorities that we have, both internal in the supply chain, purchasing department, and culturally in our relationships. In several aspects that I mentioned here are inside these priorities that we spread. We try to bring out of the paper something like looking at the total cost. The cost is in the whole chain as a whole. How can I collaborate to make better relationships and develop longer term relationships? I'm working with a partner not for 1, 2, 3 months. I'm working with them on a longer span. And with that, we try to bring to reality a priority that we have seen spread, and some of you see in the meetings that we carry out globally. And we tell everybody that these are our priorities. How do we translate that with the examples that I talked about? Going to the field and working together with all the people in the supply chain. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fred. We saw here that with a system and a network that's disciplined and collaborative, we not only control better our system, but we end up by seeing great opportunities and improvements in things that are quite simple. Let's go carry on with Fabio now. Thank you. The idea here is first of all to just acknowledge what was shown in the first session on the evolution of our structure and give a good example of what can be done. How does Scania see logistics in Brazil? From the standpoint of infrastructure, the evolution or involution, as I'll show you, we have only one posture: resilience. We have to dance according to the music, we have to be agile, and we have to adapt ourselves as fast as possible, be it in physical questions, bureaucratic and legal issues. How was that journey in the past few years? Maybe you remember this was in 2013, the famous Rua do Adubo, where the infrastructure of terminals, the grain terminals, and the dry load terminals were good, but the access structure to these terminals were well below demand. And all the OEMs will remember that month when for the first time Scania took containers via railroad. The containers were in the terminal, but we had no way to access them. And this is a sign that we see very often in our roads. Be ready, because in the next 20 kilometers your speed will be reduced. How are we doing in terms of infrastructure? Brazil today has 1.7 million kilometers of roads, of which 79% are not paved. Only 12% of our network is paved. You can note our India and China, which are part of the developing countries. China has a similar network and has 81% of it's already got asphalt. India has 45% of asphalt. And when we talk about asphalt, we see that this is a road that is called with asphalt, according to our bodies. according to the World Economical Forum. So from 2012 to 2013, Brazil lost in a rank of 140 countries. We lost our level of competitiveness. In roads, we are in the position of 120th. That these are the conditions of the game. We can stay here, take a box of tissues and cry. If we look into transport efficient and waste, that's where opportunities are, and that's where Scania decided to work. First of all, we took as a basis this a study. It's a benchmark made by CNT, where productivity by ton useful kilometer used in Brazil is 1/3 of the American productivity. So, what did we do? What have we done? We defined a framework to analyze the performance of our milk run system, which is one of the forms that we use for our inbound flow. And we asked 5 whys, and we arrived at the answer that the focus of our work would be to increase the use of vehicles. Our inbound network comprises 160 suppliers. We have 50 trucks that do some 100 collections on a daily basis from Minas Gerais to Rio Grande do Sul. In 1999, Scania was one of the pioneers in the automotive segment with the milk run segment, and it used to work with what we read today in our literature. The demand of materials created these needs. We created the call-offs based on what the system asked for, and we passed the trucks with the suppliers, hoping that the program would be complied with. And at that time, we saw that the supplies couldn't meet the variations due to a series of reasons, be it for quality or capacity, traffic issues, and we had a use of our vehicles of some 60%, 60 to 65%. In 2010, we created the dynamic system of milk run. What would be that? The system creates the needs, we send that to the suppliers, and we ask suppliers to return confirming daily whether what has been asked is going to be delivered or not. With that, we could anticipate the use of our vehicles and reroute our flows to be able to gain in the occupancy of those vehicles that arrived at almost 80%. Last year, I apologize because the slide is still in 2010. In 2014, we introduced what we called the Project Nile River, with the aim at increasing even further the level of occupation of our vehicles. And what was the great thing that we did? We created a control tower where before the forwarding of the call off to the suppliers, we do a daily balancing of each route, defining which is the most adequate vehicle and which pallets will be delayed or loaded in such a way as to maximize the use of the vehicle. At the first instance, we had collections 2-3 times a week with variable occupations of the vehicles. This is the number of vehicles down here. With the implementation of the Nile project, we increase the number of collections daily. And what do? We had to have a team that from 8 till 11 a.m. they assess the amount of pallets that we have in each one of these routes. For some, the level was pat numbers that have weight and volume sufficient. If I take away one pallet, it resolves my problem. And then I I delay or I pre-make collections to use one or two equipment for collections. And how this is done, we challenge the safety inventory. For those parts that were identified as those parts of leveling parts that will be balanced, we follow up the effect of delaying, especially the delivery at the levels of stocks or inventories. On that, those parts I risk to have just 1 day left of inventory for that material. This is done dynamically every day, rerouting our collections, and we carry out a balance between the level of stocks, the transportation cost, with the level flow. The result in the first 12 months, here we had 30% of our suppliers implemented. We reduced 120 trips. Unfortunately, these are 120 trips done by Scania vehicles. We ran 114 kilometers less, and we didn't emit 131 tons of CO2. So the final message I have, taking the opportunity of this initial talk, we can use the tissues, or we can be the protagonist or the main character. In the last edition of the Automotive Logistics, we said protagonistic logistics. That's the idea, trying to find the opportunities that there are within your processes, be them affected by financial or economical crisis, structure or not, and find what can be advantageous for us at that time. So let us be the protagonists. Thank you. Thank you, Fabio. I'm gonna make a comment. After lunch, and we have the think tank session on railroads. The the CEO of Contrail, Maurício Quintal, is going to be leading those discussions. We only have 2% of loads being carried by railroad here in Brazil. In Europe, it's almost 40%, and BLG through another group acquired the participation in the company Contrail, and this is an investment of the group seeking new alternatives for the segment, and we're also looking into the automotive segment as well. Now I would invite Paulo Sarti, CEO of Penske Logistics Brazil. Good morning. I have to speak on the microphone. After the presentation of Fabio, I'm gonna talk a bit about milk run also. There is a service that we call LLP, which is a service that Penske has offered for many years in the United States and Europe, where we brought to Brazil some 2 years ago to help in the processes of inbound of some of global clients that we also operate in Brazil. So this supplements a bit Fabio's talk. What's the full scope of this project? We will be talking about can be made in phases, implemented in several stages. In some clients, we've implemented fully, and others, depending on the maturity that we have with the in terms of relationship with our clients, we talk about route design. We talk about how to do it, the optimization of weekly cubes, which is very important in this milk run process. At which time this is valid for to implement this type of project, the benefits, and the questions will leave it for the end. Basically, the work that we offer, we are based on 5 pillars. The first one's where we start everything. It's where we look at what our clients have in the inbound milk run plan and what we can do to improve. It's very important at this time to exchange information. Our clients, they have that information. Sometimes they don't have it, and we help them to get this information. We have a team that does only this, a group of engineers, and we have all the stages, the selection of sites, what are the modes that we can use, specifically to do with routes, the inventories, the strategy of how much inventory you want to have, what risk you want to run. Fabio talked a little bit about that, what strategy each client has, and how much risk they're willing to run as to inventories. The constant alignment of the network. It's very common to take a first photograph of those routes, inbound routes, and then you have great opportunities for improvement. But this changes all the time. That opportunity that you defined today, in 2 days' time, you change suppliers, you cut production, and it's no longer the case. So the second pillar is the transportation planning. After the route is done, how we can follow up all this process. Then we have all the stages of this process. On the third pillar, it's we do a piece of work inside the client's manufacturing plants. We have hubs for concentrating parts, and we also operate these hubs. We have a whole process implemented in this area. We have a financial and analytical part. We don't execute a transportation service, but we help to manage the suppliers that already exist. So we also help our clients in the questions of payment methods, payment control, all this stage of control of suppliers that already exist. And the last part is the operations management. We help them defining when they have the need of an extra freight, controlling the payment of that freight, triggering the hiring of this type of product. The summary of is that today, when you see a traditional milk run, how do the companies define their milk runs? You look into the annual production, you have the planning of the weeks, and you establish, you have to have a scale, you have to have a significant volume of suppliers and a large group of routes, and you define this milk run. And you have production planning. Normally, so that you don't lack, establish the milk run, a route, a little bit above your production capacity, thinking that you will not be lacking anything. But the problem is that the production changes all the time. So when you defined at the beginning of the year, throughout the year, along the year, there are variations. When we have these variations, what ends up by happening is when you have demands above what you had contracted in the milk run, you have to pay premium freights. And when you are below, you have all this idle capacity of your routes that you're paying and you're not doing anything with them. So what we try to do with our clients is firstly trying to do the milk run not with that level of comfort of having larger capacities that you need. When we do the routing book, with the assessment, the forecast that we have, we do that forecast every day, altering what's going to happen next. and then we change and what's going to happen to that capacity. Then it's a cubing adjustment. So we adjust how much you have to, how much you have anticipated in terms of production, what's the capacity that you will have, then we adjust this cubing. And the second thing we do, even you still have variations in production, and then you have the carrier management. It's the management of those suppliers, calling more trucks and dismissing trucks. As Fabio said, each company defines what's going to be the level of use of their fleet. You may have 60, 70, 80%, depending whatever is defined. That's the target that we will have for the use of these suppliers. We are going through times as logistics operators. We also operate in the side of transportation. The most comfortable situations say that you have to give us discounts in your freight, and there's a limit where you can't take anything away anymore. So on the contrary, you have to help your suppliers to define the level of the fleet to be able to serve you the best way he can and give them visibility so that they can adequate their fleet to the needs of the production. This is an example of when you have, in this case, the client defined that for each route, for each case, you have levels of occupation defined with the client, that whatever they find interesting. And for this route, the level was 66.59%. And we had one definition of routes. Here we have 5 weekly routes, and as we verified, because due to a chain, look at the variation. It's so quickly done that you really need to follow it up every day. Fabio was talking about 50 suppliers. We have clients that have thousands of suppliers, and they have 600-700 routes daily. So what we do is reduce the frequency and use the truck. Instead of having 3 routes, you cut it down to 2. This is an ongoing work, looking forwards, to what's going to happen next. Who's the team who's inside the client? Talk to them, see see who you're dealing with. It's an ongoing work. It's an ongoing job. What do we need to do that? How can we do it? Do you do that for any client? For any client, does that make sense? No, you have to have, the client has to change. So the client has to pay the route. If they, otherwise you can't do it. You have to have a stable chain. It doesn't mean that it can't change, but it must be stable for a client base that's also stable. You can't change 50% of your suppliers every month. It's impossible to render any services like this. You must have certain visibility of the future, even if that's changing every month. Our clients must tell us what's going to change, and that's the greatest difference of how our relationship with our clients, how it has changed. With this type of service, you have to talk to the client all the time. If they're going to increase or reduce, we need to know before even the other people in the plant itself know. So we must have this relationship with the client so that we can be quick to be to adequate to the new reality. You bring gains on. If it were stable, it would be easy. You didn't have to change anything. But the volumes, you only bring savings in this type of service if the volumes fluctuate. And the question of information of data bank. So the type of packagings change, and then for supply chain of OEMs, you have thousands of suppliers, thousands of parts and packaging. If you don't maintain an updated data bank, this won't be feasible. You did it for one certain packaging, and packaging changes, and you will have a great impact in on the truck when the freight gets to the truck. So you have some benefits, direct and qualitative. When we get into the questions, we can talk further about this. And to summarize, in these times of challenges, when demands change, this type of sharing of information of clients and partners, suppliers, the more agile, the quicker you share this information, it's better for you to bring savings. I didn't bring figures here, because we have confidentiality agreements with our clients. But on average, in the automotive sector, we get 5 to 10% cost reduction and savings in freight implementing this type of strategy. Thank you. Thank you, Paulo. It's very interesting to see the examples where when there is more collaboration, the efficiency may improve a lot. There is great potential. We're still working very isolatedly in many cases, but this integration between clients and service providers is so interesting. And sometimes you're receiving an information about a change in shifts, and tomorrow this change in shifts already happening. So you must be aware of these processes, these changes in your clients, to be more strategic. Now we go to we will listen to Alex, Sales and Director of GEFCO. Good morning, all. I brought you a presentation that's quite simple to share with you. A little bit of our feelings and how we can we have been perceiving the market in these challenging times. I try to focus on from our point of view, of operators' point of view. What can we do to be prepared when the market comes back to normal? We live in Brazil for so many years, and one thing is for sure. Everything is going to happen, good times, bad times. How are we going to take these waves without suffering much? So I'm going to go quickly over volumes. Everybody knows that. All of you have assessed these figures every day. What's the expectation? It's very difficult to anticipate anything. How this impacts us as logistics providers. I'm going to go through very quickly about the total cost concept. This is something that's very valuable. Sometimes we lose opportunities, we miss out on opportunities. I'm going to share with you a business case of a client of ours in this concept of total cost. It's very quick, and on our point of view as to what we have to do to be prepared for the future. I brought for you a chart of Fabio. I know that you are all aware of these figures.
Just to us to be able to put this in context and tell you what we're saying, or combine this what we're saying. Up to 2010, 2012, everyone was looking at Brazil with positive eyes. And what was our concern as logistics operators? We thought we have to be prepared to benefit from this curve. I have to be able to attend to my clients. I can't lose this wave because someone else is going to benefit from this wave. And then we had the surprise of these last few years. So This loss of scale, it's the worst thing that can happen to logistics. When we have scale, it's much easier to reduce costs. When I'm losing scale, this coefficient of logistics costs and the value of the product, which is something that the whole industry looks at, it starts suffering. So, what is the first impact? What's the first action of the interest? Well, I'm going to try to reduce my logistics costs. Why? Because I'm losing volume. So it's very difficult to talk about increasing price. Well, there's a certain moment where there's nothing else you can do but increase prices. But the first idea is to reduce the logistics cost, to improve my equation. And what can we see? The industries coming with price reduction. We're not talking about productivity, we're talking about prices. So we've been undergoing this type of pressure. You have to decrease the freight. But this has limits and it has consequences. So going back a little bit to 2010, we as operators, we invested to attend to our clients. So how do we do the math now? I invested, I'm suffering a huge pressure of cost, the inflation is there, gas is going up, labor is going up, every year we have more and more difficulty. So how do I put this together with this need of reducing prices? I'm not talking about productivity, but prices. Let's say that I have a pressure to increase costs, and the demand continues dropping. So we as manufacturers, this is an equation which is difficult. How can I solve this? How can I get out of this puzzle? So what we've seen of a lot of logistics operators, those who really are in the activity, the worst is even we can even lose more volume, lose more business. We have pressure of costs. So what we've seen is the scenario getting more and more dangerous, because I'm not talking about long term, but mid-term, a lot of companies are going into a sort of big, they're putting in their life at risk if they don't take the right attitude. So what I'd like to say is that what we've noticed and what impacts our business, Paulo even talked a little bit about this as well, are these moments when the volume decreases, the instability is huge. We see that normally the manufacturers, they have a stable plan. The chain is very complex, as you saw from what was shown. So if I'm changing this the whole time, it's impossible to manage because it's so complex. But when the volumes start growing, then we see the changes happening. So I start not be able to use the adequate vehicles. So, for example, a route that I do normally with one track with good optimization, so then I change the vehicle, I start increasing the quantity of vehicles, and things end up by going out of control. Emergency flows are something that happens, we know that, but if I start using the emergency flow as a normal flow, I'm bringing cost into my chain and I'm bringing more instability into my chain. And for us, there is often the person who's operating this doesn't have this visibility, but all these costs, they are inserted in this profile change of the operation. So as an operator of an automotive industry, I have to have these requisites. They are very important. I can't operate in this industry without having flexibility, availability, responsiveness to changes. And also I have a huge performance demand. Not only me, but the manufacturers. We're looking at the satisfied client at the end of the story. So we have to have a good performance, and we as providers, whether logistics or parts, we have contracts that are very demanding. So there are penalties, there are fines, and I have to do what's in the contract. So what I wanted to do is to share with you these costs exist. If they exist in the chain, someone is going to pay. If it's tier 1, tier 2, but it happens, and there's no way that we can avoid this. So this is the time to consider new models. We have low volumes, a lot of availability of all the assets, vehicles, storage place, because everyone planned for a market that didn't happen. So the assets are there. I'm able to replan. I have more flexibility. We've also seen a lot of clients altering the profile. So if I have if I'm working in one area and I'm going to work in another area, I have to replan my flow. So since I'm doing all these changes, the instability is large. It's not the time to sit down and do something structured and more wide scope. And then, as I said already, we need to cut costs. And since I have to reduce costs, I can risk a little bit more. I'm not only attending to my client. That's not the moment. I have to attend to my client, but I have to reduce costs as well. So that's an issue of survival for everyone. Now, talking about total cost, I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to show a case of a client of mine. It's an export industry. It's a Brazilian industry, strong, respected. So we have an export to Europe with them and distribution in Europe. So what we had was an operation that used to come in through Spain. They had a fiscal incentive, and we would do this operation from Spain to all other countries in Europe. So what happened? There was a change. The VAT doesn't exist anymore. They had their own storage system in this location, and they were trying to improve transit times and reduce costs. So the initial idea, the initial demand was, I have to reduce my cost, and I have to go back to the scenario that I had of having incentives for the VAT. This is very complex, not as complex as the automotive, but a lot of things on the table. So my idea was not only try to solve that issue at that time, was to restudy the form, the model that this client had in Europe. So look at our design. It was no longer through Spain. It used to be through Spain. We started working with 4 different ports that you can see here. Not only the VAT, but the inland costs, which is a considerable amount in this case. And the issue of the VAT we're also able to attend to. So when we analyze this case, when we look at it as a total cost issue, it's getting out of the box and looking at things that I wouldn't normally look at. Look at the results that we had. We continued, or we were able to offer to the client the demand that they had to improve the cash flow because of the VAT, and we were also able to reduce 47% the inland transit time. This was a very interesting project that we did. So very much aligned to what other people said, we as logistics providers, and I'm sure that other suppliers can also support the plants to rethink the supply chain. Often simple information in logistics. Logistics, as you know, is putting together all sorts of simple things, and it has to work very rigorously. So for sure we'll be able to support you to do this. We as operators, we are investing in logistics, engineering, structures, systems, The operators need this, and that's the way we're going. And we can see that some of our competitors are going the same way. We have to establish long-term relationships. He mentioned risk. I'm mentioning you a lot, the risk part. If I don't have this vision, I have a huge risk. What's the risk of a logistics operator that's totally within my chain? If he stops existing, how am I going back? How resilient is my supply chain so that I can substitute my part supplier or my operator? The topic of costs. For me, this is probably the most important. Looking at everything at once. We are agents of this. Often it's everything is very sort of cut up. So I have to analyze the lowest cost of each little different part, and not necessarily putting all this together will I have a total lower cost. I think this way we have a big possibility of working together and eliminate the real costs of the chain. There's no point in just transferring the cost to the chain. Let's say I oblige my supplier to have a high-end inventory. It'll come back to me, and it ends up by remaining in the chain. And in our point of view, since we trade our services, here's the basic part. On top is the more strategic area of the business. Paulo talked about this area, the LLP. It's working together. So we've been working very strongly here, looking for to be competitive in the day-to-day. But we are unable, or we have been unable, to work in a very structured manner in the top part of the supply chain. So our vision is to work together in partnership, eliminate real costs, and that's how we will manage to better prepare ourselves for the future years. So that's what I had to say, and my contact is on the business card on the screen. Thank you very much. It's very good to see that there's lots of expertise on both sides of the industry, the operators, the logistics, the manufacturers. The thing is how to put this model together, this operational model, with so much know-how, and how can we get this integration to work in the best manner possible. We are now going to questions and answers. And we already have one person here on the third row. Eduardo Katakata, H Global. So Fabio, last year you made a presentation and you mentioned Scania's project as a unique product being manufactured globally. You didn't mention this time. I'd like to know from you what affected in this difficulty that we're ongoing with high levels of production in the automotive chain. How did this affect Scania's production in Brazil? This global system that Scania developed already for over 20 years, we have the same products, the same quality standards all over the world. So in a moment such as this that we're going through, it's positive. In 2013, 15% of our production was exported. Today, 60% of our production is exported. So when the crisis reaches, let's say, let's open our door, let's find new markets. This process takes time. You have to develop the market. You have to present your product, break barriers, commercial barriers, image barriers. So if in the strategy of your industry you have a process where we close the tap on one side, we open on the other. In 2013, where we were doing very well and we did not have the capacity to attend to the Latin American, the Dutch plant attended and Chile got it. Today it's the other way around. Today Europe is doing fine. We had capacity, and unfortunately we're not using it, this free capacity. We're exporting to Russia, Malaysia, Taiwan, all sorts of markets, markets that already had Scania products. So from the client's point of view, he doesn't know that the product is different to the product they used to receive before. So answering your question, this strategy today was very positive for the survival of Scania during these last months. Good morning. I'm from Eton. I have a question for Alex and Paulo. Can I ask both of you? I believe so. Well, I'm industry. We always stimulate suppliers and to bring us ideas. Where are we doing things wrong? Where do we have opportunities? And I see that more and more they our suppliers are sort of partners and they bring opportunities for us. But one thing that I've always thought and I expected but I've never received, we have a lot of clients in common. So we have suppliers and clients that are common to other clients that you have. So what's the vision that you have to capture this synergy within your clients and offer opportunities for partnerships for using logistics? When we talk about sharing volume and increasing scale, I think that's what you're talking about. I think the automotive sector has changed quite a lot. Today, I don't see any barrier in relation to, well, you transport my product or store my product, you can't mix other products of competitors and that kind of thing. So we work a lot with parts. So if I think about this, the dealers, they are one beside the other. Then in one street you have dealers of several different brands in the same street. It's the same thing as with cars. To deliver a car, there are companies that deliver more than one car, more than one brand in the same truck. But it's the same thing. You have an area of storage and it's free, for example, then you can put it together with other clients. But there's much more resistance from some clients. I know in my storage area, I don't want any competitive, I don't want anyone from the industry. We also have operations with the electronical industry. They're much more open to this. So in my storage area, I can have Harley Davidson products. It's the same, dividing the same roof. And in the automotive sector, this has happened as well. I think it's much more resistance of the client than of the operator. I think it also depends on the way you buy the logistics service. So the purchasers, this has also changed with time. Those who bought services within the automotive industry was the same one that bought the commodity or parts or assemblies. There were different departments that purchase parts and logistics services, and they compare this. Let's say the pressure was on cost reduction and sharing of scale, volume. I think this has changed quite a lot. I think operators are open to this. In our case, we don't have assets. We don't build these storage places. They're all rented, and you rent them where there's demand. If there's a decrease, I have free space that I can rent to somewhere else. So warehouses let's say the client said, no, I want a dedicated warehouse, I want a dedicated route, I want a dedicated, we can help. But it depends a lot on all these changes of mindset of the exclusive area and things like that. But there are manufacturers that are sharing their structures because they have free space. The problem is that in a few years ago, no one had any warehouse to share. I think now it's a very important. Now I have an occupied space, free space, and I can share it even if it's with a competitor. Well, we as operators, the best scenario is this one. Like if the client allows me to share, I make it better for the client. It's very clear that the survival of the contract is obviously to have gains long term and constantly. So that's the way to go. The more I'm able to share means, assets, this guarantees long permanence. For us, our engineering team, the clients have no restriction. Let's say there's a design of one project to one client, another design of another project to another client, all these systems. This is all easier and more simple to share. I think the big challenge that we have together is to get rid of these barriers and these limitations. Sometimes for you, a barrier or a limitation that's simple, this doesn't mean anything to me. For us as operators, it's not feasible to put this operation together with other clients or with other operations. So I believe that's the way to go. As an operator, you can be sure that what we most want is to share and to use our assets the most we can. That will make us more competitive. I hope that I understood. Well, yes, I wanted to have that vision because the focus was more domestic highways. We have a lot of suppliers, a lot of clients that are very similar, and due to the drop in volume, we're not occupying 100% of the vehicles. So why not trying to capture this synergy and developing this partnership concept in the market? Well, for us, this would be the best scenario.
Hello, my name is Bill Pollock.
Meu nome é Bill Pollock, da CPM. Eu ouvi alguns comentários do painel.
Across the scale in the industry here in Brazil. I'd like to ask the entire panel, what are you doing about your empty miles, your lack of efficiency in your dedicated auto carrier conveyances today? If it's like anywhere else in the world, you're looking at 40 to 50% empty miles. And there's a good opportunity to start utilizing these assets better. Any thoughts on that?
Por favor.
Inglês ou português? Tanto faz.
Pode ser português.
Português. Eu acho que todos estamos experimentando, sim, com certeza, a ociosidade.
We're all going through this difficult part. I don't think our industry is the only one. We have suffered a lot, and we have tried to eliminate the waste that we had. So this is a time where we're trying to reduce waste, reduce areas. We used to have inefficiency in the milk run due to the lack of indiscipline or high variability, so we're able to reduce this and increase the density to improve the freight. This has a lot to do with your question, something innovative that we're doing. The automotive industry is not the only one that's suffering. So within the automotive industry and outside, but perhaps we're able to do consolidating consortiums and consolidate what we contract. This is a bit different. In the past, the idea was that for high volumes, we'd always have dedicated equipment and dedicated channels, and now we're looking at this issue with different eyes. It's worthwhile sharing idle spaces, warehouses, solutions, equipment. So in our chain, we start now investigating to see how to put ourselves together with other players, perhaps tier 1 and even tier 2. And another idea that we have been unable to put in practice yet, but it is ongoing, we're thinking about it, is how to start utilizing sharing between industries that are not competitive. All industries are suffering right now, and we consume a lot in agreement with other industries, for example, services. So why not put our heads together and optimize for all industries and for all players? So that's the way, that's what we're researching now, eliminating waste and the sharing of some activities or a consortium of activities. I can add to the answer. I think Niall's example shows very well an increase initiative of the level of utilization of the vehicles, playing with the safety stock and volumes collected daily. At the same time, what we're doing is, since there's a change in the profile of the product, much more for export than for the Brazilian market, some items that were in the C curve went to A, and some that were on the A curve went to D. So we're revising our plan for some items to adequate this plan to an adensation and using the volume that we have available in our different flows. Another example of this, Scania has an import flow which is quite good because we have a global product, and what we have implemented at the end of last year was the reutilization of containers. So how does that work? When we consolidate European material destined to Brazil, at the time that the container is designated for that load, I already think how I can reuse this for exports for Africa or Asia. So 70% of the containers that I receive inbound, they go back outbound without getting off the truck. They just change docks. This is an example of using the volumetric capacity, maritime, besides highways. Well, Fabio, we have 2 more questions. It'll be a bit tight, but the questions can be quick. A gentleman at the back and another gentleman here in front, Alex. Good morning. My name is Ubirajara Lima. I'm a consultant for supply chain. I'd like to ask Fred a question about the presentation you made with the MMOG bar LE. I've already done some projects as a consultant, quite similar, where you analyze the whole supply chain of and you understand the level of maturity, planning, deliver-wise, collaboration, relationship, etc., etc. So I understood from what you said that you are closing the results of the research. Is that correct? So what I'd like to understand is, how do you see the objective reason for this research? What do you intend doing with the results of this research? What do you want to do? You want to grow the service level, cost reduction? How do you see the continuity of this work? Well, an easy way is, of course, when you talk of all sorts of acronyms, it's very difficult to remember. So if you read it quickly, it looks like Mowgli. But to answer your question, we were able to, all our base of suppliers responded to this research. This is something absolutely new. No other unit has been able to make everyone reply. So we're only starting to touch this because we have the second tier, the third tier. There's still a lot to be done. The goal is a little bit of everything that you said, highlighting several things. The first thing is that we want to identify where we have weaknesses and opportunities to improve. we started to notice that some of the things that affect us or impact us when we have a problem, some of these things could have been avoided.
When we talk about risks, we talk about the unexpected. A tsunami, an accident in Japan, something that goes out of our control and the view of what we could anticipate. But many factors, 49% of what impacts us every day, are things that someone knew in the chain, somebody reduced some safety item, didn't pay attention at something else, tried to be quicker in one details, are things that we can proactively identify and eliminate. So the first factor is identify weaknesses, because any weaknesses may generate future impacts. So I have to work on them to avoid collapse, to avoid losses. Consequently, in the first instance, this may generate some cost, but then it generates a cost reduction. So you can eliminate waste, which also affects costs and has a better level of service, because in the end, what I'm seeking is to have uh, this chain as predictable as possible, so that I can render services to our final client. Last year, I showed you a tool. We managed to apply it and collected a lot of data from a supplier basis on the first tier. Now we have to transform this in an intelligence and action to have results, and then expand this to other tiers. Thank you. My name is Alex. I'm a Yunda Glavis. My question goes to Paulo of Penske. You mentioned a lot about the variability when you talked about the milk way. This is an intelligence that Penske has and gets prepared for this. But behind that, you have your subcontractor. You must have own structures, but you have also partners structures to carry out the system. When you have this variability that has a short term, how does your partner react? Do you have the same problem? What I hear from my partners, you that they can't keep things in the shelves. What happens is the contracts with these partners have also been changing. Like I showed at the beginning, you would arrive there, go to the purchasing department of the OEMs, and they would say, this is my flow, and this is the level of service I expect from you, and I'm going to guarantee you this volume. Currently, there is no longer this volume guarantee. These partners will have to adapt, and then they will have to find other clients to compensate these volumes. This is one thing is to talk honestly to your client. I am not going to guarantee you this volume. There will be variations. I'm going to pay you premium freight when I go beyond that. And from this premium freight, you will be able to offset your capacity. And you have to be very transparent with this partner. But this is happening because in the past, in the wonderful world, you would pay the transportation companies, you would buy Scania trucks, you would guarantee that they would run, having volume or not having volume. Today you have a certain level to absorb this capacity. What we have to do is pass on to these suppliers the limits. And it's not just saying to them, this is your volume, but you won't have this volume because you're going to break this guy. You have to tell them that you have a fluctuation, but as to the freight, you have to guarantee a freight to this guy. Even when they have these fluctuations, it's still viable to operate. The contracts of transportation companies is also changing. You cannot hire someone that cannot take this volume change. We talked about what type of suppliers you have. Delphi said you have to have financial capacity to take on these challenges, and in a transportation market, the profile is changing. We see a lot of changes in these transportation companies, but this is a reality. There's no longer that easy world where you guarantee you close a contract with or without volume, you will receive your freight anyway at the end of the month. I don't know if I answered your question. We understand that for what we heard today, there are several examples that are very positive of how the chain can operate in a system of more collaboration. It's clear that we need intelligence within this network and not work isolatedly. That's how we're going to improve or manage to improve the chain and reach our objectives. And when we analyze, for example, we take that information that Fabio gave us, how they operated 10 years ago. With that view, my manufacturing plant has to be lean. I operate with the lowest levels of inventory, the Toyota's production system, but we're more and more looking outside because the levels of inventories, when you see that funnel chart, when you go out of the manufacturing plant and you go behind your chain, you see that these levels of inventory, they increase drastically, and there are several interfaces in this system, and the potential is very, very large still. Before thanking for the participation of our panelists, we will, in a few minutes, we'll have lunch. And I'll ask you to take your belongings, your personal belongings. It's a request from the organization. So I thank you all for your participation in the excellent panel. And we'll see you during lunch and in our this afternoon's discussions. Thank you.